Okay, but it should be fine now. Can I just start? Yes, okay. So we are here. It should be working. Everything should be working. So one more time, I just wanted to say to both of us who are gathered here in cities 360 in at Rondo Sztuki and Art Roundabout here in Katowice, but also to all of you who are joining us on live streaming, and also you, Fredrik. Welcome and thank you for being part of this discussion. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm holding the book. I don't know if you can see. I hope you can see the book. It's the Polish edition of your book about the aglification of Sweden. I don't know if we can hear you. Can you say something?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes. Okay. So I just wanted to say that I'm very happy to talk to you because myself, I was also living in Sweden for a bit. It was 3 years that I was studying there and living there. And I need to say that I found Sweden a very beautiful country. So I think that it will be very, very interesting conversation because you have a bit of different opinion about Sweden. Because in your book you are traveling a lot. You are traveling all over the Sweden. You've been both in the south and north, west and east, and you've been visiting many different places. And today we will be talking about the aglification of Sweden, which might sound like a paradox because actually, as I've mentioned already, we might associate Nordic countries with a good urban planning, with nice architecture. But before we just dive into the book, I would like to ask you for a very short introduction and as well maybe a bit of inspiration behind writing this book, because of course it's not your first book, and I also know that you have some interest in urbanism, so maybe you could also tell us where did it come from?
Well, it really came from some kind of feeling. I couldn't put words on it at first. Something is happening, but what is going on here? It's kind of, it doesn't look quite the same. Big changes from where I was just a few years younger. I mean, I call this book, as you said, The War Against Beauty, a report on the aglification of Sweden. I mean, how can I say that, as you mentioned, and talking about war in this context when it comes to changes in cityscapes and landscapes, cultural landscapes, it can, of course, seem excessive and outright wrong, especially considering what is happening in our immediate neighborhood in Ukraine. But the title is polemical, of course. No war is going on in Sweden. You cannot really say that. But at the same time, what else should you call it when cities and cultural heritage and landscapes are so under attack, as I try to describe in this book? The consequence of a number of changes who are on the whole very large scale and go very quickly, and at the same time appears a little bit under the radar. I mean, the Swedish big cities, they are really today huge construction sites. You might have observed that when you lived here a couple of years ago, and the landscape too is being transformed quite rapidly, I would say, by giant industrial projects, data halls, wind farms that demand very big tracts of lands, huge factories for electric car batteries in the north, and the forestry that is very, very intense in Sweden. That's just a few points of the background here.
You said that you call the book the war the war on beauty, but we can't translate it into its kind of direct meaning. But you also mentioned that a thing that I really like, that Sweden is a country in which from the 50s to 70s of the last century, very voluntary, without any war or revolution, you destroyed so many centers of your cities. And also, if you would like to explain to someone from Italy or Germany, France, or actually maybe also Poland, whose the countries, they suffered a lot, they were damaged during the war, they wouldn't understand how could you just murder and how can you have this cultural suicide in Sweden without anyone just telling you to do so. Why do you think that something like that happened? We might assume.
This is a very strange thing. As you said, while the rest of Europe struggled to rebuild its bombed out cities after the war, we here in Sweden started a process to voluntarily demolishing our cities in Sweden. And we tore them all down, our older city centers, completely voluntarily, without war or revolution. It was a fantastic cultural heritage that disappeared in this great wave of demolition. And I mean, it was not only overcrowded or poorly maintained workers' housing that were demolished, but everything from a fabulous several hundred years old palaces, charming garden towns, old bathing hotels, great villas. They demolished everything. And in many of the Swedish cities, at least 70% of the housing stock were demolished in this process during the decades after the war. In total, over something like 100,000 apartments from before 1901. In Stockholm's inner city alone, more than 700 old buildings disappeared, many of them in very good condition. And they were replaced with this centrally located department stores and parking garages and offices that were built of concrete elements and often according to the same drawings, because these stores and offices and they had the same they had their own architectural bureaus, and this is something we live in today. All the Swedish cities look almost the same, and they often are some kind of, I mean, sterile and quite boring. And as you said, how was this possible? It was some kind of cultural heritage, cultural suicide. I would say that it was because everything should and would be so good. It was because Sweden was industrialized rather late in the game, and well into modern times we had quite poor or very poor housing conditions here, with outdoor toilets and rats and 13 people in one room and so on. And the emerging social democracy, the big party here before and after the war and the decades afterward, that big state bearing party, so to say, they wanted to do away with all the old and the bad and the darkness and the dirt and the overcrowding. That should and would go away. And an important part of all this was to create lots of practical, bright and hygienic new homes that even a working class family could afford. So these demolitions were then partly ideological conditions. Ordinary people would get it better. And it was also ideological in that way that they wanted to obliterate the old symbols of the old class society, even if that motive was less pronounced. So the destruction of all these old palaces and spa hotels and villas and so on was in line with the transfer of the economic power from the old elite. So the view was in some way that because the old class society was bad, these old houses where the elite lived must somehow also be bad, no matter how beautiful and cozy and well built they were. And this is something I still notice today. One of Sweden's most famous architects, who has received quite a lot of criticism for a bunker-like art gallery in the park area in Stockholm. He said not long ago that those who complain about this type of buildings are people who think that life was fantastic in the 19th century when one had an extremely unequal society, and some people therefore could afford to build extremely lavishly. Can I go on?
I just wanted to ask you about one particular thing, because as I said before, to me, it feels like such a big paradox, because yes, Sweden is the country of something which is called allemannsretten, which is the kind of the access to the nature. This is the law that allows everyone to have the access to the nature. So you could technically use all the nature you want, unless you don't harm it, unless you don't put any rubbish and so on. But you can tent everywhere, you can use all the creeks or all the water and so on. So you can have this access to nature, which is given with the law. But at the same time, so many people are just taking this landscape for granted, and they are taking it and destroying it. So for me, do you know why there is such a paradoxical situation that you have this allemannsretten, the law for nature, but at the same point you seem, of course not all of you, but you seem to not care about the nature?
I mean, the thing here is, one big thing is the forest industry, forestry. That's a very, very important part of the Swedish economy. So, I mean, you have these rights you mentioned. You can walk and camp outside. That's an old tradition, not mentioned in law, but you can do that. But at the same time, you said that we have some special relation with nature. I don't know really. Abroad and among the Swedes themselves, there is some kind of idealized image that we who live here are particularly great nature lovers. But I would like to put a little question mark on that. I mean, 88% of all Swedes, they live in cities and towns. That's a very high figure internationally. And I think that Swedes in general are probably at least as big biological illiterates as many others. And when it comes to forests, then there is a great deal of ignorance about them, very much so. I mean, tourist organizations and others, they call the Swedish forest for wilderness, but in reality, the Swedish forest is absolutely no wilderness, I would say. For the most part, it is planted and it's driven very hard and crossed by some cobweb-like networks of roads to get access to all the timber and so on. And there also some kind of colonial attitude here for the northern 75% of Sweden. That has been in that way for a very, very long time. That that was like that in the 16th century, the 17th century. This is our India, they said, the ruling elite. This is our colony, the northern counties, so to say. That there, and you can see that again now. We have this green transformation. It's there we build all these wind farms and huge factories for battery, etc., because you have access there to power, water power from the big rivers. Yeah, and that's speaking of sorry.
Just wanted to ask about the biggest challenge then, because we mentioned already the 50s and 70s and how extremely precious buildings were demolished. And if we fast forward to now and taking everything into account, what do you think contributes the most to this uglification of Sweden, like nowadays in 2022?
Most, well, hard to say. I just want to point out that Sweden has some kind of idea that Sweden is a very modern country. That has been so for a long time, from the 30s, I would say, something like that. That was when Sweden planted in its self-image that this is our thing. Our thing is to be modern. As I said, we were industrialized late in the game, and this became something of an identity, and it still is. So a little less rigid rigidity of this strive to be modern, that would do us good, I think.
But do you think is it only problem of Sweden in that case? Because
no,
I think you also mentioned at the end of your book that it's kind of the common shared vision that we started having in our cities, that we will start to follow the technology and the modern things, and we start to like replicate the same things. We globalize our skyscrapers and buildings, and you start to lose the character.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. But in this self-image, it has very much to do with engineering. This is I mean, there are lots of engineering countries, but this is something of a speciality, I would say. Someone mentioned to me that the lack of planning is a problem in Poland. I would say in Sweden it's almost the opposite. Of course, planning can be very, very good, but when that's the main thing, you tend to forget other aspects of life almost. It has no value in some ways when you cannot put it into an Excel chart or something. That's some, I would say, problem about this mentality. I'm exaggerating, of course. This is a stereotype, but I think that there's a grain of truth in every stereotype, and this is something that many people point out, this mentality.
But I think that there is one more stereotype that I would love to discuss, because I heard about it before coming to Sweden, but also while living there, I think it was true to some extent, that Swedish people tend to be quite introvert and quite indoors. So you enjoy living indoors, maybe more than living outdoors. And that's why I also felt sometimes that streets are quite empty. And I was wondering if that observation is true. Do you think that it is also the truth that some people in Sweden, they prefer this indoor life, and they just they care most about their kind of, the indoor environment, and that's why also you like to have a very nice design, because you just want to stay home.
Yeah, I mean, you got the climate, you got the darkness. It's quite a northern country with snow and darkness several months of the year. So you are probably in the path of something there, and it's quite not so densely populated. So you maybe don't see so much people outside, even if the great cities are some million people living there. But then again, mentality, that's something difficult to pinpoint, I would say. Maybe the climate and the darkness that contribute to what you call an introvert personality type, and the sparseness also, people historical. We might don't have this urban culture in the same way that in, for instance, France and all other big European countries. So yeah.
So it is partly about the mentality, and there is interesting thing that you actually start your book with, or this is one of the first things you are writing about, because you are writing about an interesting situation that might be familiar to people in Poland, which is that in the city of Kristianstad in Skåne, in southern Sweden, there was a huge shopping mall being built, and the idea behind it was, of course, to put some life in the city center by tearing down a couple of blocks in the city center. And wow, it did completely the opposite. The shopping mall is empty.
Yeah, that's you are right. It was absolutely opposite effect, especially that they opened another shopping mall just a few kilometers outside the city. So you had and that's where all the people went to the other shopping mall. So the central shopping mall was half empty, and all the old shops around, they were struggling for life. And you see this in every Swedish city, you would say. The city centers are going bust. It's tragic. It's and especially now with the COVID pandemic, so much life has been sucked out of the city centers, and I don't know if they will ever come back. And even these shopping malls are dying. So yeah, it's quite a depressing downward spiral. Yeah.
So since it seems not to be very logic thing to do, just to be such a huge shopping mall, which is just overscaled, is too big, and seems to be like a thinking from maybe 90s. Yeah. And I was wondering if you found any information about if there was any opposition by the citizens to this crazy idea.
Yeah, I would say that it's always an opposition, but the local politicians, they are so excited to get something new happening in this quite sleepy town. Wow, a big shopping mall, we must take the chance. That's how they describe that, how these things work. So it's the same thing, everything. Maybe it's the same in Poland. Yes, would almost guess so.
I would say so. But so aren't there any instruments to preserve such old buildings and to prevent the smaller towns and also bigger towns for building such a huge structures, if it is a shopping mall, or it can be a kind of a logistical center a bit further from the city center? These are huge blocks. They are like big boxes that are just being built in the cities. Are there any instruments to prevent that?
Sure, there are, but you can always I mean, very important things you can. It seems like you can stretch these things. What is culturally interesting and what is not. That is not an exact science. You can stretch that things, and I can see also that you have some. You can mark out interesting buildings to be spared for the future, but as I write, that is less and less. You do that for some reason, and even if they are, you can. It's not cut in stone, so to say. They can be demolished in certain circumstances. So. Sure, there are things to protect buildings, but very many interesting buildings are demolished in Sweden right now. It's another wave, I would say, of this.
And I'm wondering also if people are aware of what's happening, because, for example, for me personally, but also for people I hope who are watching us who have some architectural or urbanist background, we rather know what's good, what's bad. We might assume that building a huge shopping mall in the middle of the city center is not the best idea. But if it comes to the people who are not trained architects or urbanists and so on, are they aware that those projects harm the cities?
I mean, not like in the 60s and 70s, because then in Sweden they demolished the city centers. It was very, you could see that it was where you lived and where you moved. Nowadays it's more scattered. For instance, as I described here, in 20 years or something, the state transport authority has demolished, I think 2000 or something like that, the old railway buildings, and they are scattered all around the countries, and they are very, in many cases, interesting buildings, almost like cathedrals, some of them, but people cannot see them really because they are so scattered, and that's also the case with the old industrial heritage here. It's I mean, very well built mansions and old houses in like backwaters where the industry were situated, and you don't see the decay and you don't see the demolitions that are following the decay that are necessary because people don't entertain or take care of these buildings. So to answer your question, no, people doesn't really know what is going on in a big way, no.
So what were the voices after you published your book in Sweden? Have you heard some people agreeing with you, or suddenly opening their eyes wildly and thanking you for writing about it, or they were in a denial?
Yeah, well, I would say that the debate about these things are quite polarized, I would say. You have these group that are centered very much on Facebook, who are this group are trying to to stop to build maybe more classical ways and to save old buildings and so on. They took my book to their heart. I'm not a spokesman for them, but they embraced the book. But this group I'm talking about is somehow, I don't know really why, because it involves all kind of people, I would say, but it's somehow labeled as reactionary or backwards or something like that, from the more progressive side, so to say. So this I'm not a politician, I'm not political, I would say, in any way. So but my book was I wouldn't say kidnapped, but it was they took it to their heart, the one side, while the other was more skeptical.
Yeah. All right. So how what do you think, like how many books do you need to write about uglification of Sweden to shift the public debate towards, you know, people being more concerned about how the things are in Sweden if it comes to urban planning?
I think it will be needed quite many books, but because, as I said, to be a Swede, I don't really know what it is to be a Swede anymore, because there are so many different. It has changed here, you know. It's the population growth is about 2 million in just 10 years or something, and people come from all over the world. But the mentality is still, you got to be modern and to preserve and to stop what many people see as progress. That is really hard to do. I would say that's certainly the same in large parts of the world. But yeah, it's hard to reach out to change that, because if you talk about these things, you are backwards and boring, and yeah, that's sad, really.
Are there any organizations, you know, like groups of activists who try to change this situation, or is it people just writing about it like you?
Well, the activist side, that of course there are some real organizations, and even in the state you have a department who are doing these things, that are working to preserve the heritage, but you don't hear much from them in the debate, I would say. What I would like is that the department, the state authorities would take a much bigger stand in these issues. I know this is the case in Norway, for instance, but here you don't hear so much from them, and that's a pity.
Yes, it is a pity indeed, and there are many buildings that are being demolished. Also, I guess it is a bit of a problem in Poland as well. You have beautiful buildings that, because of the lack of care, they are being demolished and replaced by other things, by the new things, by the fancy technology, as you've mentioned as well. So while you've been traveling around Sweden, gathering material for your book, was there any particular building that was demolished or was about to be demolished that really make you sad? Like,
I could mention that in the central Swedish city of Sundsvall, along the coast, the Baltic Sea, there was until recently a fantastic huge areas of old villas built during the 19th and 20th century by the new rich timber merchants, and these were fantastic summer villas that you couldn't find really something like that in much of Sweden. But the area, the region there were determined to build a logistic park right there and expand the harbor area, and that was something that really hurt when I was writing this book. I was there. I saw the decay and the demolition of these villas, and they saved a couple of them. One, they took one of them away to another part of Sweden, but most of this just disappeared, and that's that's really, really sad, I would say.
It is really sad, especially that you as you mentioned, you build a lot of these logistic parks or like logistic centers. So it's basically like huge warehouses that you ship the goods and you just rearrange them and just ship it somewhere else. Why is it so popular to build them in Sweden?
Well, I think it's popular everywhere. I mean, you there is a big change to e-commerce. You know, you don't go to the shops. The idea is to sit at home like a prison and prison cell and order everything to yourself. No, I'm joking, but that's the idea almost. So you need transport, you need this kind of warehouses everywhere. So you have them in Poland also, I'm sure.
I assume it's just interesting to me because you don't hear too much about them.
No, that's true. That's true because you don't. I mean, okay, they are not building them where people live. They build them in the outskirts of the cities where there maybe already are some ugly buildings, but still they are huge, and you transfer agricultural land to these areas, and you can never take this land back once you build on it. It's impossible. So, and they are very big also. So it's nice. Or
in the couple of last minutes of our conversation, I would like to ask you for some solutions. And I'm pretty aware, because you write in the book at the end that your intention was not to find many different solutions. Your main task for the book was to gather as much material possible and just to report the situation in Sweden if it comes to the uglification. However, you mentioned a couple of the solutions, and of course I can just read them out loud in a second, but maybe there is a step one that you would like to start with.
Well, we have to change our state of mind in these questions, I think. You cannot go on to, I mean, right now they are demolishing buildings built in the 1990s here in Stockholm, and they are planning to build new office buildings. You cannot really go on to do that anymore because it consumes so much material to build new. Why not take care of these not even old buildings a bit better and let them live longer? That's number one, I would think. Go away from the mindset that you have to demolish things. Why? You can take care of, you can change them. You can get a longer life. Everything doesn't have to be state of the art right now. You can adjust. It's not end of the world if you have an office in a building built in 1994. That's number one, I would think.
You also mentioned that the big threat is the consumption, and that the consumption doesn't mean the beauty, and also it's of course not sustainable. And I'm wondering, do you think that people would be ready to give away some of their comfort? Because nowadays, you know, it's so comfortable to go online and order something from Amazon or order your groceries from a dark store and being delivered to your doors.
Yeah, no, but I must say I'm pessimistic, because once you got these conveniences, how can you go back? I cannot think people are doing this. I mean, it's like how could you stop using a mobile phone? You are used to that. That's almost the same thing. So, well, I don't know really. I don't have many answers to your question, but yeah, maybe, as I said, some kind, maybe some kind of new laws. What do you think? Is that the way? I don't know. Have you any suggestions?
I would say that to me, it is about the kind of common sense and understanding how it works, that if we pave our city square, it means that it will be hotter and that it's not going to serve us well. I think that we also have a problem. You mentioned that we should be careful while using the concrete and asphalt in our cities. And I need to say that it is a huge problem in Poland. We have a very, very famous book called Betonoza, which was about the concrete in the city. And I think that that's a problem as well. And
I totally agree. That's huge. I mean, concrete, that's one of the worst materials that is, but it's also the best material to build with. And the so-called green transformation is very, very dependent on concrete that is in itself producing lots of CO2. So it's a dilemma, really. Yeah.
One more thing I was wondering while reading this book. Do you have any inspiration, any idea for future books? Do you think that there are more problems about the urban planning and urban space in Sweden?
One thing I would like to investigate a little bit more are these smart cities. People talk about that. Nobody really can explain what it is. It has something to do with the digitalization, of course, but I just wonder how, if you want to create a smart city, how is that compatible with old buildings? Is it possible to have a smart city with old buildings? Or does a smart city mean that you have to tear down even more old buildings? Because in all these prospects over smart city, you never see any old buildings there. Why is that? That's something I'm thinking about.
So we might expect that the next book will be about smart city in Sweden.
We will see, maybe.
I think that's a good point. I remember some images, some visualizations, some videos from a big development in Stockholm. I can recall maybe it was Hjorthagen, if I remember. And I remembered also some autonomous vehicles and buses just driving around. And yeah, I was wondering, okay, is that smart city? Is that the future?
Yeah, maybe it's dumb cities. A dumb city. Yeah.
That might be. Fredrik, the last question that I have to you, because we've mentioned about some solutions, and we are here at the World Urban Forum in Katowice, where a lot of people are meeting and sharing some ideas, sharing some knowledge. There are over 22,000 people registered for this event. You unfortunately are not with us here physically in Katowice, but you joined us online, and we are very, very glad and happy for that. And I was wondering if you maybe could share the last message with us, something that you would like to share, something that could maybe inspire us, something maybe about the book that we could take with us after this conversation.
Yeah, then I would say that to take care of what we have and value the buildings and the heritage, and also maybe what you even could call the souls of the cities. That is, I would say, really important to get to feel what is important, what is at stake. That's also that is as important as the amount of concrete that you need to build something new. Take this into consideration, please.
Thank you very much, Fredrik. I think it is a very good point just to end our discussion. And I wanted to just thank you for gathering all this material and also publishing this book. It is published in a very beautiful way here in the Polish edition. And I would like to end with a quote, because here in Poland we have a famous person who is also doing a lot of these types of reportage books, and he's called Philip Springer. I guess he might be familiar with you maybe while publishing the book, and he's just saying, it is written on the back cover of the book, that it is not that you are writing about that it's ugly in Sweden, and it is not that Philip Springer is writing about that it's ugly in Poland. It doesn't matter where we are from and where we are working, because the war on beauty and all the things that Philip Springer is writing about, they are actually the elements of the same thing that happens all over the world, all over the Europe, unfortunately. Yes. So I think that this is like a very important for and interesting as well for us Polish people, that we can kind of resonate with what you are writing about.
Okay, could I just point out one final thing? That is the name of the translator for the book, Alexandra Sprengel. That's
yes.
Important thing.
Yes. Alexandra Sprengel was the translator for this book, and then she did an amazing job. Fredrik, I wanted to thank you very much for being here with us and for sharing the thoughts behind the book. I'm so happy that I can carry this here and ask about some interesting elements of the book. So thank you very much for joining us here in the City 360 zone during the World Urban Forum. And I just need to finish with saying tack så mycket.
Tack så mycket. Tack.
Have a good afternoon or evening, and I hope to talk to you soon about the Smart City book.
Yeah, let's do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.